It's Melissa Majors, and I am thrilled to be here with you today. Welcome to the 7 Simple Habits of Inclusive Leaders. Before we go any further, I have to establish one ground rule, and it's this. This is a guilt-free zone. I am not going to shame or blame you into trying to change your inherent beliefs. And by the end of the session, if I do my job correctly, I think you'll be convinced that our brains are to blame for why we unintentionally exclude others. Before we go on any further, I have some scoop to share with you. It's about how I became committed to inclusion, which started long before I was even born. As a matter of fact, it started with this postcard. It's of what? Niagara Falls. And what is on the back of this postcard is so scandalous and shocking. It caused my grandfather to have a massive heart attack and almost die. Now, I'm going to flip it over and read it to you. Hi, folks. Just finished dinner in a cafeteria across the street from the falls. We stayed last night at a motel at Geneva on the Lake Ohio. We'll spend the day at the falls and do some shopping for souvenirs for the kids. Must look for a motel for the night before too much longer, or we'll be halfway home before we can get any sleep. Having a wonderful honeymoon. Love, Russ and Delene. Still seems innocent, right? Not so much. Check out the stamp that you see in the top right-hand corner of this postcard. This was mailed in 1969, when it had only been legal on a federal level for 2 years for interracial couples to marry. Dun, 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 there's the scandal. My father is Russ, he's black. My mother is white, she is Delene. And my grandparents, the Petersons, were the recipients of this postcard. Now here's the thing. They hated black people. They didn't actually know any, but they hated them anyway. So imagine the shock, the dismay, and disappointment that my grandfather experienced when he flipped over this seemingly innocent postcard to discover that his daughter married a black man. It was too much for him to take, and he had a massive heart attack. And it was on his almost deathbed that his minister came to him and said, listen, if you make it through this, you should at least meet this man. So friends, I am delighted to share with you that 6 months later, my grandfather met my father, and he was shocked all over again. And he realized that my father was just a good, hardworking man who loves his daughter. And these perceptions he had built in his mind about what this black man would be like, they were wrong. And here's a picture of my grandpa. We adored each other, by the way. But my grandfather made my parents promise that when they had children, they would be intentional about exposing us to difference. So we didn't grow up misinformed the way that he did. And friends, I am the product of intentional diversity and inclusion. My parents took that promise seriously, and they exposed me and my brothers and sisters to all different people from all different walks of life, different socioeconomic statuses, nationalities, race, gender, so on and so forth. And it has served me very well in my life. Not only has it served me well in my personal life, it has served me very well in my professional career as well. I'm humbled to share, I have a 20-year track record managing high-performing teams who have achieved double-digit growth. And the reason why we were so successful is because we were innovative. And the reason why we were innovative is because we were inclusive. So now, as an author, a speaker, a coach, and consultant, I help organizations and leaders unlock the power and the performance fuel that inclusion offers. I'm going to reveal some of the research that I have discovered about what inclusive leaders actually do to involve others equally. And based on my studies, here's what I have discovered. They have 7 different categories of behavior that fall into the categories that you see on the screen there. We are going to talk about each one of these during this course, We may go deeper into some versus the others. But one of the first things I wanted to discuss with you is that inclusive leaders, great leaders, they don't make promises they can't keep. As a matter of fact, they realize in order to sustain change, you have to build habits. Think about it. I'll prove it to you in 3 words. New Year's resolution. How many of you have actually kept a New Year's resolution? Yeah, not many. And here's why. We really are motivated to make change, but it often doesn't sustain itself into long-lasting change. Motivation isn't necessarily enough to create real change. However, habits must be formed in order for those changes to stick. I'd like to share with you the most incredible brain-based habit formation model. It's so simple, and you can apply this model to anything, any habits you want to build. And it's called If This Then. And I credit the Neuro Leadership Institute for making me aware of this research and this model. And what they suggest is that if you associate something you want to do with a habit you already have, you're more likely to develop the new habit. So for me, I have wanted to make my bed for 40 plus years, but it never just transformed into a habit. I would get up in the morning and I was motivated to make my bed, but I'd get into this negotiation inside of my head that took me out of taking action. Well, not so much anymore, because I associate making my bed with brushing my teeth. When I brush my teeth, boom, it triggers that I make my bed. And it takes the negotiation out of my mind that often talks me out of taking action. This habit formation model is so powerful, you can apply it to anything you want, but you can also apply it to becoming more inclusive. And so the habits we're going to discuss today are built on this framework. Why do leaders and organizations need to be inclusive? Well, inclusive leaders recognize that it's so much more than a moral obligation. Being inclusive is an incredible business advantage. McKinsey & Company have been studying inclusive leaders since 2015 and discovered that the most inclusive companies are outperforming the least inclusive companies with a 49% higher profitability. That's a lot of performance to leave on the table. 49%. That is a really compelling case to embrace and operationalize inclusion, because these companies, they're more innovative, they have much better outcomes and higher performance as a result. Here's the problem. Based on my research, 80% of C-suite executives recognize they're missing the mark related to being inclusive, but they don't know how to fix a problem. They don't know how to integrate inclusion, prioritize it, and operationalize it so they get to benefit from this incredible competitive advantage. One of the first stories I'd like to tell you is about the Tabasco company. Are any of you spicy food lovers? I live in Texas now. I used to live in Ohio, so now I am a spicy food lover because everything's just a little bit hotter here in Texas. Well, anyway, for those of you who have been spicy food lovers might remember this story. Several years back, the Tabasco company was in financial trouble. Based on research published by Management of Science, homogeneous teams are less innovative. Now let's take a look at the difference between homogeneous teams and diverse teams. With homogeneous teams, there's increased trust, there's pressure to get along, there's a higher comfort level, there's more camaraderie, they're faster to make decisions and gain consensus, but they're less innovative. And there's a lower bottom line impact due to less critical thinking. Critical thinking is the objective analysis of a problem or situation to make a decision based on evidence and fact versus opinion and assumption. Now let's look at diverse teams on the right side of your screen. They're more skeptical of one another. There are more dissenting views. They're less comfortable with each other. There's more friction and tension. They're slower to gain consensus, but they're much more innovative. They have a higher bottom line impact and due to enhanced critical thinking. You see, with all those diverse perspectives coming together, it takes longer to filter through all of them and then make a decision that satisfies the whole. But as a result of that critical thinking and work, those teams are creating net new products and services that other people haven't thought of. And remember this research I shared with you about McKinsey and Company. Companies like this and teams like this are outperforming with a 49% higher profitability. So here is the habit I'd like to recommend related to building a team. If I'm building a team, then I will be intentional about hiring for difference, not familiarity. Before we go on any further, I have to drop a dirty little secret. Our brains haven't evolved that much since we were hanging out in caves. Like, they haven't. They're still wired for survival and reproduction. Your brain is constantly scanning the environment for these factors. Will it eat me? Can I eat it? Will it mate with me? Can I mate with it? And have I seen it before? Your brain is exquisitely tuned to the perceptions of threat. So think about it. Any of your ancestors who didn't remember threats, they wouldn't live long enough to pass on his or her genes. And so our brain is constantly scanning the environment. It's hyper-tuned to potential visual threats. Now keep that neuroscience lesson in mind as we unpack some of these next concepts. Inclusive leaders are not just empathetic. Their actions demonstrate a commitment to empathy. And we're going to talk about how that sometimes it can be even harder empathizing with people who are different from us. Before we dive into the content that you see on the screen, I want to explain a couple of concepts. Number one, dominants are the people with power. You see that at the bottom left-hand corner. On the right are non-dominants. Those are the people without the hard power. Intersectionality is simply the accumulation of difference that you have compared to others. Inclusive leaders recognize that being even more different from those in power can create unique challenges for people trying to earn trust and prove their performance. The scale of intersectionality is just a visual representation to help explain this concept. Remember that neuroscience lesson? Our brains are exquisitely tuned to the perception of threat. And so our brains prefer familiarity. The more the same you are, the more likely I am to perceive you as a friend and not a threat. Let me share a simple example to help illustrate this point. So my family and I, we own a camper. And when we're not using it, we rent it out to other families. We love our second little home. And I'm always a little bit nervous about who's going to stay in our camper. Well, this woman and her family pulls up to rent the camper, and she looked like she could be my twin sister. And instantly, I felt relieved. But I know better. I know how our brain can trick us into feeling more comfortable with people that are more like us. And I asked myself, Melissa, don't be ridiculous. Just because she looks like you doesn't mean she isn't a slob and she couldn't wreck your trailer. That doesn't make any sense. But that's how our brain dupes us into making snap judgments that cause us to perceive others as more trustworthy if they're the same, and potentially a threat if they're more different. So let's go back to the scale of intersectionality. Let's pretend we all work in the same organization and older white men are the dominants at our company. If you are an older white man, you're more likely to benefit from the things you see on the left-hand side: earning trust, gaining social capital, being provided latitude to make mistakes. You're more likely to be included, and you get to benefit from the unearned advantage of their brains, the dominant's brains, perceiving you as more the same than different, thus more trustworthy than a threat. On the right-hand side, let's say you're a white woman joining the company. In the same scenario, now the scale is a little less balanced because you've added a degree of difference, which means their brains are more likely to perceive you, and you are more likely to experience scrutiny, suspicion, underestimated ability, exclusion, and then emotional tax. Emotional tax is the physical and mental impact of having to work even harder to earn trust, working even harder to break through those snap judgments and prove your performance. So imagine in the same scenario, you are a Black trans man. The degrees of difference are even more vast. So you're even more likely to experience scrutiny, suspicion, underestimated ability, emotional tax, and the burden that comes with that, the physical and mental impact associated with emotional tax. It's the social pain associated with being excluded or outcast. It literally hurts. And so many of you have probably heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Where he proved that as humans, we need food, shelter, water in order to survive. Well, a couple years ago, a new neuroscientist came on the scene by the name of Matthew Lieberman, and he said that Maslow got it partially right. In addition to food, shelter, and water, we also need social connection in order to survive. I'll prove it to you. As infants, we were dependent on the connection with another human being for our survival. And what Lieberman argues is that need for social connection carries on throughout our entire lives. I'll prove it to you in this way. I don't want you to put this in chat. Keep this to yourself. But what was the most painful experience you had in your life? Now, if we were in the same room together, you wouldn't likely tell me about when you broke an arm or even had a child. You would likely tell me about when you lost someone you loved, whether it was from a death or a divorce or breakup. But the disconnection from that social being literally hurts deeply. And what Lieberman also proved is that the pain with social disconnection is processed in the same part of the brain as physical pain. It literally hurts. And so many non-dominants who experience exclusion and the things we talked about earlier, they cope. They cope by either leaning back, disengaging. Sometimes they may fumble their performance, trying to connect with the dominant group. And oftentimes, many will just leave to avoid the pain associated with exclusion. How many of you have heard a colleague say they were treated unfairly? If you have, in chat, type unfair. When I teach this class in person, almost everybody raises their hand. But so often, if we didn't have that experience, we felt we were treated fairly, we tended to discount people's perspective and their opinion, which not only makes them feel excluded, but makes them feel devalued and unheard. Empathy is the antidote for this, my friends. And I appreciate Chris Voss's definition. He's the author of a book called Never Split the Difference because it's tactical, it's action-oriented. And he says it's this: describing and demonstrating an understanding of the needs, interest, and perspective of others without necessarily agreeing. You don't have to sympathize to empathize, but you do have to understand someone's perspective in order to empathize with them. It's critical that when you hear someone describe an unfair experience, that you empathize so they feel heard, even if you don't agree. So here is the habit I'd like to recommend, my friends. If someone describes an unfair experience, then I will actively listen to understand and empathize, even if I disagree. The next series of behaviors we're going to discuss is around collaboration. Inclusive leaders are unapologetic about eliminating and mitigating any barriers to healthy collaboration. It's collaboration that gets things done on a team. One of the common barriers I'd like to share with you is related to interruptions. Did you know that women are interrupted 6 times more than men? 6 times. And no wonder women are so frustrated when they leave a meeting, because we can't get our thoughts out. And this is more than just an individual frustrating situation. It's a micro problem that creates macro issues with organizations. Remember how we talked about it's those diverse perspectives that lead to unique ideas. Well, what if, because of interruptions, we're cutting off a source for those ideas and those contributions? We have to mitigate interruptions. And for the record, women aren't just interrupted by men, they're interrupted by women and men equally. So we all have a part to play here. I'd like to recommend a tactic called echoing. Let's say I'm in a meeting with Suzanne and I notice she got interrupted. I could say this: I noticed Suzanne got interrupted, but I'd really like to hear the rest of her thoughts. Oh, friends, and in such a discreet way, it gives the floor back to Suzanne, but it also creates awareness in the room that she was interrupted. Echoing, try it, it works. And so here's the habit I'd like to recommend. If I hear someone get interrupted, then I will echo their voice. Inevitably, when I teach this class, someone always comes up to me and says, I wouldn't feel comfortable taking a stand. So I'm curious, would you feel comfortable taking a stand? And although the majority of us will say, absolutely, we would take a stand, in the moment, do we? It's harder to take a stand in the moment because remember, your brain is wired for survival. And by taking a stand for others, your brain will say, don't get involved. You're risking your own survival or reputation here at the firm. Just do nothing. I want to play a short, about 3-minute video that is credited to Burger King. And it's not related to inclusion, but it is related to how difficult it is in the moment to take a stand for others. Let's watch.
Scrawny, chubby, short,
queer.
getting caught up in bullying, it's so easy because you're just glad that you're not being bullied.
It's been hard for me to stand up for other people because I feel like I'm already a target. It's just easier to do nothing.
Please stop.
Fine.
Dude, ow.
Fine.
Stop.
Fine.
Ow. Stop.
Do you have any friends?
Yes, I just heard you.
What are you even doing here? It's too easy.
Ow. Stop.
Come on.
I get it.
Maybe you are a little bit more.
You think you're special?
One more Virginia meal.
Dude, stop.
You're fine. Oh.
I just opened it up and it's all smashed. Did you order bullied or unbullied?
Bullied or unbullied?
Yeah.
Do you have a manager that I can speak to? Because that doesn't even make any sense.
Hi, how's it going?
I was given this.
Did you bully this burger?
Well, yeah. This is a defenseless Whopper Jr. It can't defend itself.
I don't mean anything by it. It's just for
It's
laughs.
just for laughs.
What are you? Is there something wrong with you?
Because that's clearly what happened.
Can't be serious.
Had you seen me bullying this burger, would you have stood up and said something?
Yeah.
It's good to know.
Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm okay.
Yeah. What's your name?
Reese.
Hi, Reese.
We're just having fun.
You having fun? He's not having fun. So therefore, I think you guys should just leave him alone.
Later. This feels better to me.
Never been like messed with before.
Oh my god. This is like the ideal world is where if somebody else sees like something weird happening that they'll come over and be like, hey, this is not okay.
Yeah.
To feel defenseless, that's the one of the worst things in the world.
Chelsea came and she would just tell them that it's not okay because it isn't.
Something I'll never forget is my friend standing up for me.
I've been that kid, so if I see it, I'm gonna do something about it. And I hope there's more people out there like that.
It's a hard video to watch. It is. I'm sure it was hard for the people in that restaurant to watch that kid being bullied. But majority of them just watched. They didn't take action. And what this proves is that only 12% of the people, based on that experiment, will stand up for injustice and take action. And although we think we'll do it in the moment, our brain talks us out of it, which is why it's so critical that we build habits that will remove that negotiation in your mind that says, don't take action. We have to build habits to sustain change and take a stand. The next set of behaviors we're going to talk about is around an inclusive mindset. Inclusive leaders derive their value from being more curious than feeling like they have to have all of the answers. So many of us as leaders are duped into thinking our value comes from being the smartest person in the room. That is absolutely not the case. A few years ago, I took over global education for a large technology firm. And one of the first things I did, because it was not in great shape, it was turnaround gig. So one of the first things I did was I asked questions of everybody that laddered up to me. What was working, what wasn't working, what would they do if they were in my shoes? And one of the women on my team, it still cracks me up to this day, she said, Melissa, you make the big bucks, you're the boss. Just tell us what we need to do. Don't you have all of the answers? And my response to her was this: I will never have all of the answers. I'm not all-knowing, but together, there isn't a problem we can't solve. I needed as the leader to give her permission to share contrarian viewpoints, to share good and bad feedback, and let her know her voice mattered, and I needed her perspective. I am naturally wired as an innovator and have been a professional envelope pusher throughout my entire career, trying to find ways to improve everything that we do. But so often sharing feedback or contrarian viewpoints or new ways of considering things was considered negative or complaining, and it was met with defensiveness. And a lot of leaders got offended when I would question how and why we were still doing certain things. But that wasn't the case at all. I was simply trying to innovate and find new and even better ways of doing things. So here is the habit I'd like to recommend based on the best practices of curious inclusive leaders. If someone shares a contrarian opinion, then I will choose curiosity instead of getting offended and ask them to tell me more. A few years ago, I took over global education for a large technology firm. And one of the first things I did, because it was not in great shape, it was turnaround gig. So one of the first things I did was I asked questions of everybody that laddered up to me. What was working, what wasn't working, what would they do if they were in my shoes? And one of the women on my team, it still cracks me up to this day, she said, Melissa, you make the big bucks, you're the boss. Just tell us what we need to do. Don't you have all of the answers? And my response to her was this: I will never have all of the answers. I'm not all-knowing, but together, there isn't a problem we can't solve. I needed as the leader to give her permission to share contrarian viewpoints, to share good and bad feedback, and let her know her voice mattered, and I needed her perspective. I am naturally wired as an innovator and have been a professional envelope pusher throughout my entire career, trying to find ways to improve everything that we do. But so often sharing feedback or contrarian viewpoints or new ways of considering things was considered negative or complaining, and it was met with defensiveness. And a lot of leaders got offended when I would question how and why we were still doing certain things. But that wasn't the case at all. I was simply trying to innovate and find new and even better ways of doing things. So here is the habit I'd like to recommend based on the best practices of curious inclusive leaders. If someone shares a contrarian opinion, then I will choose curiosity instead of getting offended and ask them to tell me more. Here's a big question. Are you biased? Yes? Probably? No? Or I'm not sure. Think about your answer. Nobody else is going to know. Now I'm going to reveal how the average attendees answered this question. Are you biased? 31% of your colleagues said yes. 53% said probably. 5% said no. And 10% said, I'm not sure. Spoiler alert, if you have a brain, you're biased. That's right. In our brains, biases are a threat detection mechanism. So if you have a brain, you have biases. Remember, our brains are exquisitely tuned to the perception of threat. So any of our ancestors that didn't remember threats, like the saber-toothed tiger would eat us, they wouldn't live long enough to pass on his or her genes. And so those biases are formed in our brains. We're just remembering potential threats. That's how it works. And inclusive leaders recognize this. And so they embrace their bias. They don't deny that they exist. If you deny they exist, you can't prevent them from controlling your actions. Refresh your memory again on our brain. Remember, our brains are constantly scanning the environment for these factors. Those patterns, it remembers those potential patterns of threat, like the saber-toothed tiger. And those then shape and form our biases. And so here's the habit I'd like to recommend. If I catch my biased thoughts, then I will examine them and choose my actions. I'd like to tell you a very vulnerable story that illustrates the importance of accepting your biases, identifying them, and preventing them from controlling your actions. Remember I told you I took over that large division in that education division at that technology firm? Well, it was the first time in my career I became responsible for managing partners and clients in the Middle East. I needed to fly there to meet with the potential partners to bring on some new ones. Leading up to the trip, I had so much anxiety about traveling to the Middle East, but I couldn't put my finger on why. So anyway, I went there, I met with these partners. I was pleasantly surprised. They were kind and funny and so warm, really smart and dedicated to my company's success. I was reflecting on the day and was relieved and so satisfied. Then I started thinking, why was I so pleasantly surprised? I was questioning myself, and then it hit me. I realized that what I was expecting was the enemy. I realized that I was prejudiced toward a group of people I didn't even know. And then the shame that swept over me because of all people. You know how I was raised. You heard my origin story. Of all people, I allowed my brain to get programmed with negative perceptions of people I hadn't even met yet. And then I realized, Melissa, if you're going to do your job, you've got to overcome these biases. You know, growing up in the Midwest in the United States during my era, I wasn't exposed to anybody from the Middle East. I didn't know anyone. And I realized that my mind had gotten programmed by what I was seeing on television, which were negative images of people from the Middle East, war-torn cities, conflicts between the United States and countries in the Middle East. You know, our service men and women in conflicts and at war and so on and so forth. Well, those images was the only exposure I had to people from the Middle East, and they programmed my brain. If it could happen to me, you know how I was raised. I do this work for a living, and if it could happen to me, what could be lurking inside your brains, biases that you don't even realize are there? I want to share this process that I followed to, first of all, accept those biases, identify them, and prevent them from controlling my actions. Here's the process. You have to recognize that those unconscious thoughts are going to occur. They happen in all of our minds, those pesky negative little thoughts that pop in your mind that may say, he's different from me, he could be a threat. The next step is examine your thoughts. Although our brains are still pretty much wired the way they were when we were hanging out caves, we now have developed a prefrontal cortex, which allows us to rationalize our thoughts. It's what differentiates us from other vertebrates that react simply based on instinct. We can choose rational logic. And you may ask yourself something like this: did he earn my distrust? If not, my biases are probably influencing me. Next, you can identify your patterns of bias. Are there groups of people you have prejudices towards? And you may ask yourself this: when interacting with people different from yourself, pay attention to those patterns. Ask yourself this question: I often distrust individuals like him. I'm likely biased towards this group of people. And then last but not least, you can plan your next steps. I will mindfully choose to view and treat him equally, just like I do others. Now, I want to underscore this word here: earn. Did he earn my distrust? If you don't remember anything else I say today, remember that word, earn. When those thoughts pop into your mind that judge others in an instant, question those thoughts and really dig in and examine if that person earned that negative judgment or not. Now, I have been in this business a long time. I'm exposed to a lot of rigorous assessments that are out there related to examining your biases, but I'm going to give you a real simple way to find out what biases may be lurking in your mind. Look to your parents. That's right, these are my parents. This is Russ and Delene that you see here on the screen. You heard about them earlier in the session. When your biases were formed in your younger years, your parents' biases were also shaping your own. Think about the people that your guardians and parents weren't comfortable with you playing with as a child. Think about the groups of people that your parents may have been comfortable joking about. Examine some of those thoughts. Did your parents see women in a powerful light, or did they see them in a more subservient position? Ask yourself some of those questions, and you will start to uncover some of the unconscious thoughts and perspectives that may be lurking in your brains as well. And when you do, friends, regardless of your religious beliefs, I think it's so important that we forgive ourselves and we forgive others. And again, regardless of your religious beliefs, I think this passage from the Bible is so poignant to remind us to do this. And it's this: Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. When you realize the extent to which your biases have informed your thoughts and your behavior, the guilt and the shame can be debilitating. And so important to forgive yourself because you didn't realize the impact that these biases are having on your behavior and ultimately on others' experiences. And if you've been on the receiving end of others' biases, forgive them, because more times than not, they were unintentional and they didn't know what they were doing. And if you're unable to forgive others, it can turn into poison for yourself, feeling like a victim or feeling hate for others. Forgive yourself and forgive others. The next series of behaviors we're going to examine is around inclusive decision making. I am so honored to introduce you to one of my friends, colleagues, and a leader that I respect. Her name is Janet Trapp-Hagen, and she's the president of the Creative Group, which is a large event management and marketing firm based in Chicago, Illinois. And one day I was helping Janet facilitate a strategic planning meeting with her team. Now, Janet and I had met many times leading up to that meeting, and so I knew how she felt about certain situations and experiences. But in the meeting, she was really quiet, and I thought it was strange. And so on a break, I went to Janet and said, Janet, I know you have a perspective on this situation. Why aren't you sharing your thoughts? And Janet responds to me and she said, Melissa, simply because of my position in the firm, I recognize that my voice has gravity. And then if I speak first, I risk people telling me what they think I want to hear versus how they really feel. So I intentionally stay quiet, listen to the perspective of others and their ideas, and then based on their thoughts and mine, then I make decisions. So you've heard all about my grandparents. I've introduced you to my parents as well, but who you haven't heard about is my studly firefighter husband, whom I love dearly. He is my best friend. He is the best father I could ever ask for my kids. And even after 10 years of marriage, I still have a crush on my husband. But the reality is, he gets on my nerves. He does. He gets on my nerves. You see, my husband is a news junkie. And so one night he was toggling between Fox News, CNN, Fox News, CNN. And I was like, will you pick a channel already? You are driving me crazy. And he said to me, Melissa, these news channels are biased. And if I only listen to one channel or the other, I'm going to get a biased viewpoint. And I really want to know what happened. And the truth is somewhere in the middle. You see, friends, our social circles operate a lot like our favorite news channels in that they're probably biased. And if we're honest, our social circles are likely more segregated than they are integrated. And so that puts us smack dab in the middle of an echo chamber when we're surrounded by people who look and think a lot like us. And it causes us to get really convicted in our opinions that we're right. Not only are we right, we are really, really right because everybody around us agrees. And so what happens then when we're faced with an opinion of someone who disagrees? We think, oh, not only are you wrong, you're really, really wrong because I am really, really right. Our social circles have such an influence over our perspective. And I think Bill Bishop, the author of The Big Sort, described it best. We now live in a giant feedback loop, hearing our own thoughts about what's right and wrong, bounced back to us by the television shows we watch, the newspapers and books we read, the blogs we visit, the sermons we hear, and the neighborhoods we live in. Now, it is not realistic to expect us all to change our social circles. That's not going to happen. But being so convicted in our opinion and surrounded by people who agree can easily turn into this us versus them mentality. They're either with us or they're against us. And that's a dangerous dynamic in the workplace as it relates to building cohesive and collaborative teams. And I want to show you a quick 30-second video that reveals how this mentality can easily dupe all of us into falling prey to this us versus them mentality. So what do inclusive leaders do to mitigate this us versus them mentality and position themselves to be open to different opinions? They practice something called intellectual humility. Intellectual humility recognizes that we are not all knowing. We can't have all of the answers. And so our perspectives are kind of like Swiss cheese. They have holes in them. And intellectual humility is accepting and acknowledging that what you believe to be true, it might be wrong. And when you do that, you accept that, it positions you to be open to different opinions. Here's a habit I'd like to recommend. If the majority of my social circle looks and thinks similarly, then I will accept that I may have blind spots to the experience of others. We've covered a lot in this session, my friends. Thank you so much for being engaged to the very end. We have talked about the business case and the why behind being inclusive, that it's more than a moral obligation, it's a business imperative. We've talked about how to practice tactical empathy and acknowledging the experience that may be different for some because they're even more different. We have talked how to mitigate barriers to collaboration, such as the interruptions that women experience more frequently, and using tactics like echoing. It has been such an honor being here in this space with you. If you don't remember anything else I said today, though, remember this: involve others equally. Also, let's stay in touch, okay? Please, I'd love to continue the conversation with you. Stay in touch with me. I have lots of great resources on my website, melissamajors.com. And if I can ever be of service, don't hesitate to contact me. Be well, my friends.